congratulations to former Bucks and Colts coach Tony Dungy, who was enshrined into the Pro Football Hall of Fame on Saturday night. He was elected in his third year of eligibility. Dungy made the playoffs in 4 of 6 seasons with the Bucks and each of the 7 seasons with the Colts. Dungy was the first African-American head coach to win a Super Bowl and has the most NFL wins by an African-American head coach as well. Stephen A., what were your thoughts on Tony Dungy being enshrined in the Hall of Fame?
Well, first of all, I'm happy for him. I'm proud of him. But although folks that's why they probably changed the question, I'm going to ask the question and then answer it for the viewing public out there.
Okay.
And that question is, if Tony Dungy were white, would Tony Dungy be in the NFL Hall of Fame? I'm going to say no. I'm also going to say it would be wrong to view it that way. Driving around all weekend long, listening to talk radio, talking to friends and family members who are avid football followers and lovers and people like that, you know, they look at guys like Tom Flores, George Seifert, Jimmy Johnson's got 2 rings, Mike Shanahan's got 2 rings, you know, various individuals who have coached and have won Super Bowls, even more Super Bowls than Tony Dungy, who happen to be white and were not in the Hall of Fame. And obviously, when you look at Tony Dungy coaching for 13 years in the NFL, having 1 Super Bowl title on his resume, having a 139-69 record, which is a 66% winning percentage, you look at that and there are some people who believe that's not enough. They believe that, you know, Tony Dungy, he's in a Hall of Good, or should be in the Hall of Good, as in the Hall of Good guys, as opposed to the Hall of Fame as a football coach, which is why I brought up that question, because I wanted an opportunity to address this nation about Tony Dungy's significance. Yes, us in the African-American community look at Tony Dungy with reverence, being the first African-American football coach to win a Super Bowl title. Obviously, Mike Tomlin ultimately delivered the goods as well. But let's be clear about something that's incredibly important here. We want to walk around in today's society and act like we've evolved so much that when you are black, you still don't have to do twice as well to get half as much. The fact of the matter is a vast majority of African Americans in this country feel exactly that to this day. And so when you consider that and you think about what Tony Dungy had to go through to get to a point where you win a Super Bowl championship, what I would say to all the radio hosts and television hosts and pundits and commentators out there, I understand that everybody appreciates Tony Dungy. Everybody appreciates him as being a wonderfully good guy. What you're not giving him enough credit for is the perseverance that he exercised en route to the excellence he ultimately achieved. This is a man that was a starting quarterback in college football at Minnesota for 3 years. This is a man that led the school in completion, passing attempts, passing touchdowns, all of this other stuff. He went undrafted in 1977. He got picked up by the Pittsburgh Steelers. He wasn't allowed to play the quarterback position. He had to switch to safety. And even though he was only in the NFL for 3 years as a player, one of those years was their '78 Super Bowl championship when they beat the Dallas Cowboys, okay? That particular year, there was a particular individual by the name of Tony Dungy who actually led the Steelers in interceptions. He had 6 that year, okay? Then he goes to the coaching ranks. He's a defensive coordinator in Pittsburgh from '84 to around '88. He ultimately loses his job, ends up landing in Kansas City before becoming a defensive coordinator. I believe it was in Minnesota. Then he lands a head coaching job in Tampa. And no disrespect whatsoever to the great John Gruden, because John Gruden knows his football. John Gruden was a hell of a coach. John Gruden proved himself on the coaching level in the NFL, and I'm proud to call him a colleague here at ESPN as an analyst. But somebody paved the way for John Gruden to capture that Super Bowl championship in Tampa. That would happen to be Tony Dungy. That's one of the reasons why you have such a plethora of African Americans today that go off about Golden State and Steve Kerr. I'm here to tell you, Max, if you know anything about Steve Kerr, he's a good man. He truly is. He's a good man, and he's proven to be an outstanding coach. But if you're an African American, you can't help but notice that, damn, what he inherited was a pretty good situation, which Mark Jackson left behind. Those are the similar kind of things that people look at when they see what happened with John Gruden and Tony Dungy. That's just fact. So when you take all of that background into consideration, and then you look at the fact that Tony Dungy still stuck around long enough to persevere and to go through that terrain and to put in 28 years in the NFL and ultimately capture a Super Bowl championship, because our very own Bill Polian, another analyst here at this network, who's a Hall of Fame executive and a great, great man, I love him, he hired Tony Dungy and had him there, okay, in Indianapolis to position him to win a Super Bowl championship. I think I'm correct in that. If I'm wrong, I apologize, but I think it was Polian that brought Dungy there. So all of that background is what elevates the stature of Tony Dungy. So when you look at Tony Dungy as a Hall of Famer, don't just look at his record. Don't just look at him being a good guy. Look at the fact that this is a man that endured and withstood stuff that, if we're being honest, most white coaches have never nor will ever have to endure in the United States of America. Tony Dungy is just as close to reverence as you can get. He is a great, great man because he pounded the pavement, he withstood, he persevered, he conquered, he triumphed. That's what makes Tony Dungy great, for those of you out there who did not know.
I was very happy to see him get into the Hall of Fame, and I think you did a very good job then of explaining the influence he had. By the way, I don't even remember if you mentioned Tampa 2 defense,
yes,
which he really, he instituted kind of systematically. And John Gruden took over the team and won a Super Bowl. And Dungy, I think, gets a lot of credit in the press for having something to do with that. By the way, even race aside, Buck Showalter brought the Yankees in the mid-'90s to a point where Joe Torre took them over.
That's right.
There's a history of this in sports, and I think the person who ushers in the era of prosperity, doesn't really get to the mountaintop, but or can see the promised land, but doesn't get there. That guy does get credit. That's Tony Dungy. I don't think you can separate race from his Hall of Fame candidacy any more than you could do it for, let's say, Jackie Robinson. Now, I'm not saying there's an equivalency between Tony Dungy and Jackie Robinson, but there is an analogous kind of situation. There is some kind of analogy to be made here. The first African-American coach in a sport that really didn't have proportional representation in the coaching ranks at all, to win a Super Bowl. Jackie Robinson, if you look at his career, he had a great prime, but he had a short career because he didn't get to the majors till late. If he wasn't Jackie Robinson, would he be in the Hall of Fame? I don't know, but that's an absurd question to even ask because of the significance that he had breaking the color barrier. The fact that he's the first African-American coach to win a Super Bowl, the fact that he should get some credit for Gruden's Super Bowl, which would mean kind of 1.5, the fact that he was on that Steelers team, the fact that he is a famed broadcaster, all those things go into it, but especially the kind of social significance he had as the first African-American coach to do it. And I think there's another component to Dungy, too. I think it's an issue of karma. And when I say karma, I don't mean in a mystical sense.
Yep.
I mean in a secular, literal sense. Not just that what you put out into the universe comes back to you, but that the way you treat people. Yep. And I don't think he does it so that he's treated well. He does it because it's the right thing to do. But his philosophy in terms of the way he treats people, not just the players, but the people around him, has come back to him now. Is he a slam dunk Hall of Fame? Yes, he should be in. Well, I mean, here I'm admitting that the social significance adds to his candidacy. But the fact that he always treated people well, that everyone likes him, also doesn't hurt here, Stephen A. People want to do the right thing by him.
That's fair. That's fair. And nobody's refuting that. What I'm saying is, listen, walking around listening to pundits and beyond, it's fair for them to ask that question. It's fair for somebody white who happens to be a pundit or a commentator to feel that way. Football players, football coaches, people like Jeff Saturday, who's about to come on here, and those like him who know far more about the intricacies of football and what it takes to be successful than you and I could ever hope to know. Obviously, they're going to feel a level of respect and deference to the great Tony Dungy because they get to appreciate his greatness in ways that we may not even see. But what I'm saying to folks out there who would ask the question, who would look at, you know, a Tom Flores, who would look at a Jimmy Johnson, a Mike Shanahan, and others that say they're not in the Hall of Fame, but they won more Super Bowls than Tony Dungy. I'm trying to enlighten folks as to a different perspective. From that disenfranchised community that makes up about 13% of the American population, we view Tony Dungy differently in the respect that we recognize what he had to go through to get to the point that he got to, where his greatness would ultimately be appreciated. Some people might look at him and they may say, he's a football guy. That's what we see. He's great. He did a great job. And you might stop there. But if you're a member of that community, you're going to be sensitive to the road he had to travel to get to that point, because that's what a lot of people in our society, particularly from disenfranchised communities, want other people to see. They want people to see the road less traveled.
Yep. And how about the fact, forget about the fact he only had one losing season as a coach. I mean, he was a very winning coach in both stops.
Yes.
But the coaching tree, right? When you talk about African-American coaches in the NFL, like Lovie Smith and Mike Tomlin, they're on his coaching tree, and that counts for something.
Yes. He had one losing season, which was his very first in 1996 with Tampa at 6-10. Other than that, he had a 500 record in 1998. Every other season, he had a winning record.
One losing season in his career.
I know it's not the Hall of Good, but I loved what he said. What does it profit a man to gain the world, if only to lose his soul? And he touched so many people's lives, including Jeff Saturday, who will be with us. He played with him for 7 years there with the Colts. But up next, we're going to discuss RG3 is the new man in Cleveland. Jeff will join the conversation. How will the Resurrection Tour turn into it? We get into that next.